Shalom, I am Nama Ru. This is my husband, Rabbi David Ru, and we've been looking at the beginning of the laws about the Shmita year, the seventh year of the 7-year cycle, which actually the first year you said that the Jewish people returned to Israel from the desert when they were eating manna. You said Hashem made it a Shmita year that year as a transitional time with all the sanctity of the produce growing, just like the sanctity of the manna itself, just like the sanctity of the food in the Garden of Eden. So that's a teeny bit of review from our most recent video, but actually I need some more review because it's a lot of information and I just need a little more help getting it, organized in my mind.
There are various sources that fruits and vegetables can come from during the Shmita year. What I have suggested is the best source to buy is an otzer bastin, that the bastin is formed to take care of the need. Well, bastin is formed to always take care of the needs of the Jewish people. But one of them is people in cities don't necessarily have the ability to harvest everything they need. So the bastin hires people to harvest fruits and vegetables of Shmita and hires people to distribute them in the cities, villages, whatever. And when they're distributing, they can collect the money for the expenses of this process. And the bastin can hire whomever they want. They often hire farmers. Some farmers from X harvest their neighbor's fields, and all sorts of things are done with this. The bastin also has to rent the machinery that's necessary and so on. But you're not paying for the fruit in that case. You're paying for the expenses of getting the fruit to you. Now, otzer bastin clearly has the sanctity of the Shmita year, and everything, all the fruits and vegetables, whatever you buy from an otzer bastin, has to be treated appropriately. There is one source that I didn't touch upon, and I want to add right now, is actually a common source of vegetables in Israel today, and that is hydroponic farming. Hydroponic farming, because it's completely separated from the ground, has no sanctity of the Shmita year. And something that we're going to touch on later is if you're growing things in pots in your house, and they are atzit she'enakov, a pot that doesn't have a hole in the bottom of it, then also that would be the equivalent of hydroponic farming, or I should say the reverse, hydroponic farming would be the equivalent of that, and that thing would also not have the sanctity of the Shmita year.
So do you have to do separating truma?
You still have to separate trumas meisers.
Because it's not part of the
but
Shmita.
It's never something that you have to worry about, because those places that grow hydroponically farming are all under supervision. It's also very common for them to sell their stuff in sealed containers, because they can control it in such a way that it's impossible to get any kind of insect infestation in them. So if there's an advantage in buying hydroponic farming stuff always that's done under hashgacha, because there is no problem of bugs in it, and you actually don't have to check for bugs if you get under the hashgacha that says so. The fruit that comes from non-Jewish produce, according to the Mabit, still does have the sanctity of the Shmita year, even though you can buy it from the non-Jew without a problem. According to the Beis Yosef, it doesn't have the sanctity of Shmita year. The minhag in Yerushalayim, certainly Badatz in Yerushalayim, and almost all the other kosher supervisions in Yerushalayim, is to consider this not Shmita produce. The minhag in Bnei Brak is to consider it, yes, Shmita produce. Things that come from heter mechira, from the land being sold, the halacha would essentially be the same as it's non-Jewish produce. So it would again be the debate between the Bibit and the Beis Yosef, whether it has sanctity. Rav Kook says in principle, we paskin like the Beis Yosef. It doesn't have sanctity, but it is good nonetheless to treat it as though it had the sanctity of the Shemitah year. Now, when does Shmita begin for different things? This is something that we've spent 3 videos, in fact, on. And we said there are category A, grains, kitnios, olives, and grapes. Once they are 1/3 grown, that defines the year they're in. So if they're 1/3 grown before Rosh Hashanah going into the Shemitah year, then what's harvested after Rosh Hashanah doesn't have the sanctity of the Shemitah year. And going into Motzi Shvis, into the 8th year, if it's 1/3 grown before Rosh Hashanah, then it will have sanctity of Shemitah year, even though it's harvested in the 8th year.
And so all the practices around that apply.
Right. In other fruits, there is a debate. The Rambam holds they're the same as what we just said. If they're 1/3 grown, then in a non-Shmita year, they're not Shmita. If they're 1/3 grown in a Shmita year, then they're Shmita. The harvesting is irrelevant. The Rambam says Chanata is the same as 1/3 grown. The Rash, in his commentary on the Mishnah, which is the generally accepted opinion, is that this Chanata is when the flower falls off the plant. And as we discussed, there are only a few things where it turns out that there's a bait, like kiwis and avocados, where there's a difference between these two things, where according to the Rosh, the kiwis and avocados that we have in the beginning of the Shmita, that we harvest in the beginning of the Shmita, would not be sanctified with the Kedusha Shmita, and according to the Rambam, they would.
Because the flower fell off before Rosh Hashanah, but this only applies to trees.
But they're not 1/3 grown. This only applies to fruit other than olives and grapes, which the Gemara separates from all the rest. And nothing else. So these are there are very, very few there's a halachic difference between the Rambam and the Rosh. The halacha seems to be like the Rosh. Most people accept that. And the primary reason is because if Chanata were the same as 1/3 grown, then, which is when we determine the general things for Trumas Maisus, why would the Gemara separate and say Tivua, Zaysim, and Anavim, grains, olives, and grapes are when it's 1/3 grown, and all other fruits are Chanata, which seem, if they're the same thing as the Rambam is implying, it should be at the same time. Vegetables, because they are constantly growing or harvest and they grow more on the same thing, and it says they're Gedulim al Kol Mayim, they grow on all water, meaning they constantly require water. Therefore, the only thing that's important with vegetables is when they're harvested. If they're harvested on the day after Rosh Hashanah, they going into the Shemitah year, they will have sanctity of Shemitah. If they're harvested the day after Rosh Hashanah, going out of the Shemitah year, they will not have the sanctity of Shemitah.
If I harvest tomatoes during the Shemitah year, they have the sanctity of Shmita.
Yes. Esrog is a problem because it says it requires a huge amount of water. And the Gemara says in some ways it's like fruit, and in some ways it's like vegetables. So therefore we're machmir for both ways. There's a discussion whether other citrus fruits have the same halacha, and we say that they do not. There are differences between other citrus fruits and the esrog, and so all other citrus fruits we determine by when the blossom falls off of the tree. That is a summary of the last tapes that we've been having, and hopefully with the review it will become clear. It's interesting to note, whenever you see a traditional sefer like a Gemara, a Mishnah, traditional Mishnayos, or even the first print of the first Mikros Gedolos, there are always 4 lines of commentary before the text starts. The commentary wraps around above the text, and it comes from a Gemara in the Roofing, and it's quoted in Rashi and Perish and Chumash, that when Moshe Rabbeinu brought down the Torah, he first taught it to Aaron HaKohen. Aaron HaKohen, he sat by his right side. Then his sons came in, and Moshe Rabbeinu repeated the lesson to his sons. The sons sat one on the right, one on the left. Then the Zakanim, the elders came in, the 70 elders came in, and they heard the lesson. They sat down. And then all of Klal Yisrael came in, and they heard the lesson. At this point, Aaron HaKohen has heard it 4 times, once for himself, once for his sons, once for the elders, once for Klal Yisrael, and Moshe Rabbeinu leaves. Aaron HaKohen then reviews the lesson. So Aaron's sons have now heard it 4 times. 3 times from Moshe Rabbeinu, once from Aaron HaKohen. And Aaron HaKohen leaves, and his sons can't stand up and repeat the lesson. So the Zakanim have now heard 4 times, twice from Moshe Rabbeinu, once from Aaron HaKohen, once from Aaron's sons. And then Aaron's sons leaves, and the Zakanim stand up and repeat the lesson. So Klal Yisrael has heard it 4 times. Once from Moshe Rabbeinu, once from Aaron HaKohen, once from Aaron's sons, once from the Zakanim, and then they review. Review is critically important if we're going to remember the material. So we're stopping at this point. We've done a review, and next time we'll go on from here.
So, but I contacted one of the farms that I do like internet order for delivery to the house, especially during COVID lockdowns. And I asked them, what's going to happen next year during Shmita year? And they said, oh, we have it all set up like in our greenhouses, and we have all the oversight in place. So it seems like they're doing hydroponic and like growing things not in the ground. And so it seems like I maybe don't want to actually buy from them, except for I want to support them. But I actually do want, like you said, like we should strive for eating this holy food when we have the opportunity only every 7 years. It's so holy.
Well, there are certain points of the year when vegetables are impossible because of the rabbinic prohibition of tzvichim, because the rabbis saw that people were planting things and therefore they prohibited things even if they grew on their own during Shmita. And so for certain things, the best solution is hydroponic farming, but we're not to that yet. And so we're not going to jump ahead yet.
Okay. And the last question I have then is, if we grow in our home in pots without holes herbs, and we want to harvest them during the Shmita year, we have to separate Truma and Maser?
We will get to that.
Okay. Thank you.